October 17th, 8:42 p.m. A kitchen table under low amber light, rain pressing softly against the windows. A phone screen lights up, then goes dark. Across the table, someone laughs, the kind of laugh that used to pull you in, but tonight you don't lean forward, you nod, you listen, you say less than usual. And that's when they feel it. Not hostility. Not anger. Just distance. They can't name it, but it unsettles them. You haven't raised your voice in months. You don't argue the way you used to. You don't defend yourself with urgency. You don't chase misunderstandings down dark hallways of over-explanation. You've become still. From the outside, stillness can look like coldness. But something else happened, something quieter. There's a subtle emotional migration that begins when a person outgrows noise. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a dramatic decision. It unfolds slowly, like a room losing echoes after the crowd has left. You used to respond quickly. Messages, conflicts, emotional shifts, you were available to all of it, almost reflexively. Now there's a pause. A deliberate pause. And in that pause, people feel something unfamiliar. They feel they can't quite reach you the same way anymore. Not because you've withdrawn into resentment. Not because you've armored yourself in bitterness. But because something inside you has reorganized. Carl Jung believed that as we integrate aspects of ourselves we once rejected, the shadow parts, the impulsive parts, the overly accommodating parts, our energy changes. It becomes less scattered, less reactive, more contained. Warmth doesn't disappear. It becomes selective. That's the part people struggle with. You still care, you just don't leak. Before, your emotions spilled outward, you over-explained, you reassured, you filled silence with effort. It felt like kindness, sometimes it was. Sometimes it was fear of disconnection. Now you let silence breathe. Across that kitchen table, the other person feels the difference. They search your face for the old urgency, the quick validation, the eager agreement, the immediate emotional labor. It isn't there. Instead, there's presence. And presence without performance can feel intimidating. You don't interrupt. You don't rescue awkward pauses. You don't chase tension down. You allow it. That allowance unsettles people who are used to being emotionally carried. They might call you distant. They might say you've changed. They might whisper that you're colder now. But what they're really sensing is this. You no longer react to be loved. And that realization begins to rearrange everything. Because when someone becomes harder to reach, it forces others to ask a question they'd rather avoid. Were they connecting to you? Or to your availability? The rain keeps falling outside, the kitchen grows quieter, you feel calm, not frozen, not numb, just steady. But across from you, something has shifted. They can feel it. And they don't know what to do with it. The shift didn't happen at the kitchen table. It started months earlier, maybe years. A different night. 1:13 a.m. Your room lit only by the glow of a laptop screen, a message thread open, paragraphs typed, deleted, rewritten, deleted again. You were trying to explain yourself. Again. There was a time when explaining felt like survival. If someone misunderstood you, you corrected it immediately. If someone seemed distant, you reached further. If tension entered the room, you absorbed it like it was yours to dissolve. You believed connection required constant accessibility. But something inside you was getting tired. Not physically tired, not the kind sleep fixes. Psychologically saturated. From a Jungian perspective, there comes a stage in development when the persona, the adaptive self we present to maintain harmony, begins to crack under its own weight. The more we perform coherence, the more the unintegrated parts of us press from beneath. The resentment you never voiced. The exhaustion you minimized. The boundaries you postponed. They don't disappear, they wait. And one day you notice something subtle. You don't want to explain anymore. Not because you don't care, but because you finally understand yourself well enough that constant translation feels unnecessary. That night at 1:13 a.m., you closed the laptop without sending the message. It felt reckless, almost rude. But it also felt quiet. That quiet was new. For years, your nervous system was tuned to emotional alarms. Someone's tone changed, you adjusted. Someone grew silent, you compensated. Someone projected frustration, you internalized it. Now, you let signals pass through you. Not everything requires intervention. This is the part people rarely witness, the internal reorganization, the moment when you stop confusing hyperresponsiveness with love. Warmth used to mean availability. Now it means intention. There's a difference. Before, you responded quickly because you feared distance. Now you respond slowly because you respect energy, yours and theirs. You began asking invisible questions. Is this mine to carry? Is this mine to fix? Is this even about me? Often the answer was no. Carl Jung believed that individuation requires withdrawing projections, both the ones others place on us and the ones we unconsciously accept. When you stop accepting emotional assignments that were never yours, your entire relational pattern changes. You become harder to reach. Not unreachable, just no longer automatic. There's a discipline to this shift, a restraint. You feel impulses rise, to over-explain, to reassure excessively, to fill silence, and you let them pass. That restraint creates space. And space can feel like absence to those who were accustomed to constant access. You noticed it in conversations first. People leaned in slightly more, they repeated themselves, they asked if you were okay. You were. That's what unsettled them. You weren't angry, you weren't hurt, you weren't withdrawing. You were simply no longer overextending. And here's the quiet truth. When you stop abandoning yourself to maintain connection, some connections destabilize. Because they were built on your overfunctioning. The night you closed the laptop without sending that message, something irreversible happened. You realized silence didn't equal loss. It equaled sovereignty. But sovereignty comes with a cost. The people who loved the version of you that explained everything begin to miss them. And that's when the real tension begins. 2 weeks later, 4:36 p.m. A cafe window streaked with late afternoon light, the low hum of conversation, porcelain against wood. You're sitting across from an old friend, someone who has known you long enough to remember your former softness, the immediate empathy, the quick laughter. The way you used to lean in as if every story required your full emotional investment. They're talking, you're listening. You are present fully. But you are not leaning in the same way. There is space now, subtle, measured. And they feel it. Halfway through their story, they pause. You've been different lately. It's not accusatory, it's searching. Different. The word hangs between you like steam rising from untouched coffee. You don't rush to defend yourself, that alone confirms their suspicion. Before, you would have softened instantly, explained, assured them nothing had changed, maybe even apologized for a shift you hadn't consciously chosen. Now you breathe. I've been thinking more, you say. It's true, but it's incomplete. What you don't say is this. You've stopped volunteering your inner world to anyone who hasn't proven they can hold it carefully. From a Jungian perspective, when shadow aspects integrate, when we acknowledge our suppressed anger, our buried boundaries, our unspoken needs, warmth becomes more conscious, less reflexive, less desperate to be affirmed. There was a time when you confused emotional transparency with safety. If you revealed everything, you believed intimacy would stabilize itself. But revelation without discernment can become self-erasure. So you learn to filter. Not to manipulate. Not to withhold affection. But to protect depth from casual handling. Across the table, your friend studies your face. They can't locate the old entry points, the quick emotional access, the subtle cues that signaled, come closer, I'll meet you there. You're still kind, still attentive. But you are no longer porous. And porous people are easier to reach. That's the quiet truth beneath the accusation of coldness. People feel safest with those who overextend. Because it requires nothing of them. Now your presence requires mutuality. If they want access, they must step forward, speak honestly, drop performance. Some will. Some won't. Your friend tries again, they share something slightly more vulnerable this time, a layer beneath the surface story. You notice it immediately. You respond not with urgency, not with emotional overcompensation, but with steady attention. And something shifts. The connection doesn't collapse, it deepens. But it deepens slowly. That slowness feels unfamiliar to them. And maybe to you too. Because here's what no one warns you about. When you stop performing emotional availability, the pace of your relationships changes. Fewer people rush in. Fewer conversations feel dramatic. Fewer misunderstandings spiral. But the ones who remain differently. Carl Jung believed that maturity requires holding tension, resisting the impulse to resolve it too quickly. You're doing that now, holding space without rushing to fill it. To some that feels distant. To others it feels safe. The cafe door opens, cold air slips inside, someone laughs loudly near the counter. Your friend finally nods, as if accepting something unspoken. I guess you just seem more guarded. Guarded. It's easier for them to say that than this. You are no longer easily entered. And as you leave the cafe, stepping into the pale evening light, you feel something steady in your chest. Not isolation. Discernment. But discernment has consequences. Because not everyone is willing to knock. And soon, you'll discover who was only ever comfortable walking through an open door. December 3rd, 10:18 p.m. A dim hallway outside your apartment. The air carries that winter stillness, the kind that makes every sound sharper. Your phone vibrates. A name you haven't seen in months. You already know the tone before reading it. Casual, light, as if no distance has passed, as if nothing ever shifted. Hey, miss talking to you. There was a time when that message would have pulled you instantly. You would have felt relief, validation, a quiet urgency to reopen the channel. Tonight you lean against the wall and just observe. Your body doesn't surge forward. No spike of anxiety, no rush to respond within seconds. Just awareness. From a Jungian perspective, once a person integrates the parts of themselves that feared abandonment, relational impulses lose their panic. The psyche no longer scrambles to secure connection at any cost. You don't ignore the message. You just don't abandon yourself to answer it. You think about the last time you spoke, the subtle imbalance, the way you carried most of the emotional weight, the way you left conversations slightly drained but told yourself that was normal. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't toxic, it was simply uneven. Before, uneven felt acceptable, familiar even. Now it feels loud. This is the part people misunderstand. You didn't become colder. You became attuned. Attuned to reciprocity. Attuned to effort. Attuned to energy exchange. You type back slow, measured, kind. Hey, I've been focusing on some things lately, hope you've been well. There's warmth in the sentence, but there's also structure. You don't offer immediate availability. You don't reopen emotional doors without awareness. A minute passes, then 3. The reply comes. You've changed. You almost smile. Yes. But not in the way they mean. Carl Jung believed that individuation requires a withdrawal from unconscious relational contracts, the invisible agreements where one person overfunctions and the other receives. When those contracts dissolve, the dynamic must either rebalance or end. You feel the quiet fork in the road. If you return to the old rhythm, the quick reassurance, the open access, everything will feel familiar again. Easy. But that familiarity came at a cost. So you let the space remain. The hallway light flickers slightly. Somewhere upstairs, footsteps move across wooden floors. You realize something subtle but irreversible. Access to you is no longer automatic. It isn't guarded by walls, it's guarded by awareness. And awareness filters. Some will interpret this as distance. Others will feel invited to step forward with equal presence. The person on your screen hesitates, you can sense it even through silence. They're recalibrating, deciding whether the new version of you still fits their comfort. You don't chase their decision. That's new. For years you would have softened here, made it easier, smoothed the tension. Now you let them choose. Because here is the truth beneath all of it. When you stop reacting to be loved, love either grows or fades. And you are finally strong enough to let it reveal itself. The typing indicator appears, disappears, appears again. Whatever they say next will tell you everything about why they were drawn to you in the first place. The typing indicator stops. Then the message arrives. Feels like you don't need me anymore. There it is. Not anger, not accusation. Fear. You read it twice. Not to decode it but to feel it fully. Because this is the hidden fault line beneath many connections. Was the bond built on mutual presence? Or on being needed? For a long time you were needed. You were the emotional first responder, the steady voice, the one who absorbed tension and translated confusion into clarity. People felt safe around you because you anticipated their emotional weather before they even named it. But safety built on your overextension required you to stay slightly fragmented. From a Jungian perspective, when shadow elements integrate, especially suppressed resentment and unexpressed limits, a person stops deriving identity from indispensability. They no longer unconsciously seek worth through being required. And that shift can feel threatening to those who relied on it. You type slowly. I care about you, but I'm learning not to disappear inside relationships. You pause before sending it. This is new language for you, clean, direct, not defensive. You press send. There's no dramatic music swelling, no visible explosion, just a quiet truth placed gently between two people. Minutes pass. Outside, winter air settles over the city. The world feels still, as if holding its breath with you. Then the reply. I didn't realize you felt like you were disappearing. Of course they didn't. You never showed it. You were too busy being strong, being understanding, being emotionally literate enough for both of you. That's the paradox of quiet overfunctioning. It hides its own cost. Carl Jung believed that maturity requires facing the parts of ourselves that seek validation through sacrifice. You did that work alone, in silence, in long nights where you questioned whether your exhaustion was selfishness. It was. It was misalignment. Now, standing in this hallway with your phone in hand, you feel something unusual. Not triumph. Not relief. Clarity. You don't need them to understand immediately. You don't need the conversation to resolve tonight. You don't need reassurance to soothe the old reflex to over-explain. You just need to stay aligned. And that is what makes you harder to reach. Because reaching you now requires meeting you where you stand, not where you used to bend. The message thread grows quiet again. Maybe they will adjust. Maybe they won't. But something inside you no longer trembles at that uncertainty. That's the transformation. Not coldness. Not detachment. Stability. And stability can feel distant to those accustomed to emotional volatility. You push off the hallway wall and step inside your apartment. The door closes with a soft, definitive sound. In the silence that follows, you notice something unexpected. You don't feel alone. You feel intact. And for the first time, being harder to reach doesn't feel like loss. It feels like arriving.